here's how I think the average American might think about cancel culture. Hey, occasionally people get canceled, but it's mainly social media related. It's not maybe that big a deal. I find it unlikable, but it's not something I should be, staying awake at night thinking about. Now, your book has a number of awesome contributions in it. It's a much more rigorous cataloging, shall we say, of cancel culture. It breaks it down, its impacts on different institutions. Ricky, you said that, hey, that a lot of this is still on campuses, which I think is where most people think of it. So let's start at campuses. Why are college campuses such a fertile ground for what we'd consider cancel culture? And for a moment for people, how would you define cancel culture?
So I think that campuses are really fertile ground for cancel culture because you show up, you're young, you want to fit in, and oftentimes there's a very loud illiberal minority of students who are tying people's viewpoints to their personal status or who they are as human beings, and very indulgent in these ad hominem attacks, and will attack people on social media. And when you're a kid that shows up and you're afraid of putting yourself out there, and you think that, like I did, I was hiding books under my bed like Jordan Peterson and Thomas Sowell, you really feel as though you can't put yourself out there. And I learned the kind of jumping off the cliff and writing for the New York Post and saying, here are my viewpoints, and I think that free speech is a problem on campus, which was my first major op-ed. All the people around me felt the same way, or the vast majority. I had people coming out of every crevice of roommates, of deans, of like whole departments and professors that I had who would come to me quietly and say, oh, I completely agree with you, and good on you for writing about free speech on campus, but just don't tell anyone that we had this conversation. And so I think there's something about that highly ideological bubble that really lets this go awry, and where those really aggressive, loud people who tear people down, who use bias response hotlines, because the administration has just put this whole bureaucracy around cancel culture and basically indulging it. It's the tyranny of the minority just goes crazy in real life in the same way that I think it does in social media, and then in like the live action version on college campuses, essentially.
So, Greg, how would you define cancel culture? It sounds like you have a technical definition.
Yeah, I do have, and this is one of the few times I'll sound like a lawyer, but I want to be precise about it. And it's the uptick beginning around 2014 and accelerating in 2017. And after, of campaigns to get people fired, disinvited, deplatformed, or otherwise punished for speech that is or would be protected by the First Amendment, and the climate of fear and conformity that has resulted from this uptick. Because I'm trying to make clear that we're not talking about something that's strictly partisan, although the term cancel culture is oftentimes, something that people will accuse the left of being guilty of, and certainly that's true to a large degree. But we also take on cancel culture from the right, because what we saw after 2014, and it wasn't subtle, was just suddenly people were, rather than just being really embarrassed on Twitter or Facebook, they were losing their jobs for jokes that went viral, for example. And on campus, one of the reasons why it is just so frustrating that there are still people, trying to claim this isn't happening. The uptick in professors getting canceled is unlike anything we've seen in the modern era of higher education. I mean, the law protecting academic freedom and free speech on campus wasn't really clear until about 1973. And there hasn't been a period like this in that entire time when this many professors are getting, fired, tenured professors in many cases, for what they say, what they print, what they and having their research that getting them in trouble, and sometimes actually having it withdrawn, which is usually considered an extraordinary measure. One of the goals of the piece of the book was to put it all in one place and try to give some historical comparisons. Like when you talk about sometimes people it's very funny watching people who don't really know anything about the history of freedom of speech claim, oh, these are, no, these are tiny numbers. It's not significant. But when you're talking about over 1,000 professors targeted, just in the last 9.5 years since cancel culture began, with about 2/3 of those punished, with about 1/5 of those, about almost 200, fired, you're talking about numbers that blow away even things like the Red Scare, where the normal estimate's about 100 professors, were fired. And at the time, everyone knew the Red Scare was happening. Like that a lot of that research actually was contemporaneous with it. So it's been I try not to use this word too often, but it's been a crisis on campus. And yeah, we point out when about 1/3 of those punishments come from usually the off-campus right, and we call those out as well. But I do want, at the same time, I remember saying this to somebody on social media. I'm like, well, but a third of them come from conservatives. Like, but you're implying that the rest come from the left, and it's like, well, yeah, you don't think there's a free speech problem on the left on campus? Like that's just is willful blindness at this point.
Yeah, and I might add that on the right wing cancel culture kind of side of things, this is something that, like, I know I'm going to take a lot of flack from some people that might otherwise like what I write about and stuff, but I have absolutely no problem calling out what I see as fighting illiberalism with illiberalism and fighting might with might in a really disturbing way, because there's like a wide opening for people and leaders to step in and say free speech has been largely abdicated as a major principle of the left. And here we are going to actually step in and adopt that rather than fight that hot mess that's happening in the radical left wing with our own authoritarian hot mess on the right, which is just super disappointing to me. And I think that there's such a lack of a positive restorative roadmap to like, how can one side or no side or just a group of people in the center or people who just are actually classical liberals reclaim those values? And it feels as though that's not a conversation that happens often enough. And it's like, oh, we're the champions of free speech on the right, but then here are all our very authoritarian bills that actually curb free expression at the same time. It gets my blood boiling.
Hey YouTube, glad you're enjoying the podcast. If you really like it, hit subscribe, and then YouTube will notify you every time we have a bang up new guest. Thank you.